Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Noun Chea, during the year 1973, King Norodom Sihanouk came apparently to pay a visit to Cambodia and went to Phnom Kulen. Can you tell us who took the decision for that trip to be made? What were the reasons behind it, and how did it go?
Response. Your Honor, in 1973, when the king was in Beijing, he intended to conduct a visit to his children, so-called his people, in the country. And therefore he contacted through China the Communist Party of Cambodia. And the Communist Party of Cambodia were pleased and accepted to receive his royal visit. However, at that time, Vietnam opposed the visit. They said, if the king went there, the king had to go through the Ho Chi Minh route before he arrived in Cambodia. And that would be kept secret if he went through the Ho Chi Minh route. No one would be allowed to go to that way, except the Vietnamese and the Vietnamese troops. As a result, the king contacted the Vietnamese so that he could travel through Ho Chi Minh Trail. And Vietnam did not allow the Chinese cadres to accompany the king. He appointed a Vietnamese general, and a number of troops to escort the king from Hanoi through the Ho Chi Minh Trail to Stung Train by a small car. When they arrived in Stung Train, the Communist Party of Cambodia, with Pol Pot the secretary, was in charge of the safety of the king. That is why there were a number of troops put in place to guard the safety of the king. At that time, American planes were bombing tremendously in 1973. Those planes included F-5, Phantom B-52, and the spy planes were flying back and forth to monitor along the Mekong River. Nevertheless, the Communist Party of Cambodia prepared everything in order to safeguard the safety of the king. Therefore, when the king arrived in Stung Train, the king crossed the Mekong River, going forward to Rithy province. And as I remember, he went to Kampong Thom, where he took a rest in a commune called Bang Krum in Previhir province, says the accused. The king stayed there for a while, and Pol Pot appointed me and Noun Chea to prepare to arrange the travels to Angkor Temple. And there we built a house for the king and his wife. It was very dangerous at that time. There were many planes flying over, back and forth. However, we were able to safeguard the safety of the king so that he traveled safely and arrived in Siem Reap. And he went to stay in the house that had been built in a mountain, and he praised the place. He said it was small, but it was beautiful. He was very satisfied. And he did not expect that the Communist Party of Cambodia had the ability to safeguard his safety. And after that, people in Previhir province and in the nearby provinces, including monks, were summoned to receive the king, and religious ceremonies were held, and the king greeted those people. It took about 7 days for the king to stay there, and he toured Angkor Temple. He praised the leaders of the Communist Party of Cambodia that they were attentive to his safety, and he felt grateful to them. And after that, they escorted the king back, and they also took the Ho Chi Minh Trail, crossing the Mekong River, and on that way there were submarines of the enemies going back and forth as well. But they were able to deliver the king to the other side of the river. And from that point onward, the Vietnamese troops took charge, escorting the king back to Ho Chi Minh through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. What was the reason why Vietnam did not allow the Chinese to escort the king? That was because Vietnam was trying to grab the power from China, because Vietnam did not want China to have any influence on Cambodia. That is why, for whatever it would take, Vietnam would try to take this job. But as I understand, the king was not very happy with that, because the king already contacted China. So after that, the king went back to Hanoi, and he arrived in Beijing safe and sound to continue his leadership of the struggle. So this is my narrative of his travel.
As you recall it, Mr. Noun Chea, was the king able to meet Pol Pot? Or what members of the Standing Committee did the king meet?
Your Honor, there was a reception party for the king, but I'm sure the king would have met Pol Pot, Son Sen, Ieng Sary. Ieng Sary was accompanying the king, and some other zone cadres. And as for me, I did not attend the party. That is why I do not know for sure who else were there, because my task was to safeguard the king from Kampong Krum, says the accused.
Merci, Monsieur Noun Chea. Je voudrais maintenant...
Thank you. About the fighting that took place between 1970 and 1975, can you tell us if you were kept regularly informed about how the military operations were evolving and what the outcome of the battles and combat was? What information did you have at your disposal?
Response. Like what I have told you, Your Honor, I was not responsible for the military. I was responsible for education. However, I was also aware of the fighting, but I was not sure myself, because I did not go to the fighting myself. The military cadres went to the fighting.
Monsieur Noun Chea, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Mr. Noun Chea, can you, for example, tell us about the fighting that took place at Udon? Were you told about this fighting? Did anything particular happen at those events?
ខ្ញុំមិនបានដឹងទេ
I was not aware of that.
Vous nous avez parlé de...
You talked to us about the evacuation of Phnom Penh. As far as you are aware, were other towns that were also taken also evacuated?
បើតាមខ្ញុំដឹង
As far as I know, there were also evacuations in other major towns. For example, the Krathi town. In Krathi town, there was no evacuation because the evacuation was under the control of the military. For example, the evacuation of Phnom Penh. For that evacuation, there was a military committee who were taking care of that. And as for me, I was responsible for education. So we had these different jobs. We have the military administration and we have the assembly job. For me, I am responsible for education and not for the military.
Why were the other towns evacuated, as far as you know?
នេះ
It depended on the zone committees because at that time there were divisions for different committees. As I remember, there were the East Committee, the East Zone, the North Zone, and Northwest Zone. There was also the Northeast Zone. And so, the authorities to decide on the evacuations were on the zone committees. It was for the zone committees to decide whether evacuation was to be done or not.
Just to be certain that I've understood, it was the zone committees that decided on their own without referring back to the standing committee. They were the ones empowered to take decisions such as that on their own, and in which case what was the reaction of the standing committee?
ភា
Zone committees had the authorities to do that, and there was no reaction from the standing committee because the standing committee was far from those people, and the power was delegated to the zone committees to decide on this issue. That is, the zone committee will have to see. It depended on the fertility of the land to decide how many people were to be evacuated to their zone. The Central Committee and the Standing Committee were not able to understand these situations fully, as they already delegated the powers to the zone committees. Let me tell you this. Everything had to be decided very quickly, otherwise they would miss the chance. For example, when there were enemies attacking us, there was no need to seek approval from the Central Committee or the Standing Committee. The zone committees were entitled to deal with the situation. Otherwise, they would miss the chance to respond to the situation. As far as I know, it was the guerrilla attack plan, that is to attack as quickly as possible, to confiscate weaponry as quickly as possible, and to retreat as quickly as possible. And there was no need to seek approval to do that from the superior. And this is this is what has been specified in the lines, the party's lines, that we had to be self-reliant and to be self-mastery.
Mr. Noun Chea, are we to understand that in the delegation of power that was made outwards towards the heads of the zones, the Standing Committee had planned for the cities to be evacuated? Was that something that had already been understood in the delegation of authority, even if the decision to actually do so had not yet been taken?
បានជម្រាបហើយ
As I have said, this issue was under the decision of the zone committees.
Mr. Noun Chea, I understand that the zone committees decided on those questions, but you also talked about a delegation of authority to the zone committees. Who was responsible for delegating that authority, and how far did it go? Was it already planned within the framework of that delegation of power that towns and cities could be evacuated?
បញ្ហានេះ
For this issue, as far as I know, the Central Committee held meetings in order to decide and the Standing Committee provided their opinions and their analysis. They could provide their opinions, but the decision was to be decided by the zone committees.
You talked about the criteria that were taken into consideration when deciding about evacuations, and one of them, if I understood correctly, was the fertility of the land. Please tell us a little bit more about that particular criterion of the fertility of the land.
ខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបថា
With regards to the criteria of the fertility of the land, we used plants as fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers were not allowed to be used, but people were allowed to use the animals' remains to transform those into the fertilizers to make the land become fertilized. Because using natural fertilizers would provide us double outcome.
Bien, je vois pas très bien le rapport.
I'm not quite sure about the link between the fertilizers and the evacuation of the cities. I'm not sure there is one, but let me ask you another question. Could the Standing Committee stand in the way of the evacuation of certain towns?
Que cela s'est
And did that ever happen?
តាមខ្ញុំដឹង
As far as I know, there had no opposition from the Standing Committee because that job was already delegated to the zone committees, and so the zone committees were to be responsible for that.
Alors, une ultime question.
Well, finally, Mr. Noun Chea, have you heard of a list of 7 super traitors, and who drew up that list, and when, and what was its purpose?
បញ្ហានេះខ្ញុំមិន
I have never heard of that.
គ្រាន់តែឮ
I have never known of that, but I have heard of that. But I was not one of those who made the decision. I have heard of that through radio broadcasts.
Bien, je vous remercie, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noun Chea. Mr. President, I have no further questions to put to the accused.
The President, thank you, Judge Lavange. I'd like to check if any other judges of the bench would like to question Mr. Noun Chea. If not, I'd like to give the floor now to the prosecution to put the question to the accused Noun Chea if you have.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you just give me a moment to set up our podium. Good morning, Mr. Noun Chea. Mr. Noun Chea?
ខ្ញុំស្ដាប់ឮ
Noun Chea, yes, I hear you.
In the statements you've made since the trial has begun, you've repeatedly pointed the finger to Vietnam and made some general assertions about how they exercised control over the party in Cambodia. So I wanted to start by clarifying one thing that's quite important. You do not seem to me to be a person who would have taken orders or instructions from Vietnam or from any other country. So what I wanted to ask you is, during the period that you were the Deputy Secretary of the party, can you confirm that you were not a puppet of Vietnam?
ខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបលោកព្រះអញ្ញា
Response. Allow me to comment, Mr. Prosecutor. the Indo-Chinese Communist
Le
Party
Parti communiste indo-chinois
was not created by the Cambodian
n'a pas été
people.
créé par les Cambodgiens.
Let we be specific on that.
Il faut que nous soyons précis.
It was created by the
Il a
Vietnamese
été
Communist
créé par
Party
le Parti communiste vietnamien
since 1930.
en
That is from
1930,
my recollection.
pourtant je me souvienne.
And after the establishment of the party in 1930,
Le PCI a donc été créé en
Cambodian
1930,
people,
après quoi,
as far as I know, because at that time I was still very
pourtant je me
young,
souviens parce que j'étais encore très
but
jeune à
I
l'époque,
heard people talking about
mais
that.
j'en ai entendu parler.
Cambodian people
Après quoi donc,
disliked the
les
Vietnamese.
Cambodgiens
They really hated the Vietnamese.
n'ont pas aimé
So, the
les
Communist Party
Vietnamiens,
of
ils les ont même
Vietnam
haïs. Et donc, le Parti
Did
communiste
not
vietnamien
expand that much.
n'a pas
However, at a later stage,
réussi à s'élargir. Mais plus tard,
it was around 1950
vers 1950,
I cannot recall the year that well.
je ne me souviens pas exactement de l'année,
Vietnam contacted a Cambodian person in
Vietnam a
Cambodia
contacté
Krom who was a monk.
un moine cambodgien du
His name was
Kampuchea Krom.
Aja Mien,
Il s'appelait Aja
and the name
Mien.
he used as a monk
C'était le nom qu'il portait en tant que
in
moine
Wat Thanh.
à Wat Thang.
It was actually a Vietnamese Buddhist pagoda.
Qui était une pagode
A lot of
bouddhique
Vietnamese who were
vietnamienne.
residing in Cambodia
Beaucoup de
liked to go to that pagoda.
résidents au Cambodge aimaient aller dans
So
cette pagode.
Aja Mien was contacted
Aja
by
Mien a
the
donc été
Vietnamese
contacté par les Vietnamiens
in order to organize a
pour
revolutionary
organiser
organization.
une organisation révolutionnaire.
However, the reason why Aja Mien
Mais la
changed
raison
his name
pour
to
laquelle
Sơn Ngọc Minh
Aja Mien
was that
s'est fait appeler Song Nok Min
at that time,
et qu'à l'époque,
that is post the Geneva Agreement,
c'est-à-dire après les accords de
this
Genève,
so-called Sơn Ngọc Minh was influential amongst the intellectuals
Song Ngọc Minh était
and
une
amongst the public
personne
servants,
influente parmi les intellectuels et les fonctionnaires.
and he was also famous as a
Il
patriotic
était aussi connu comme patriote,
who dared to oppose the monarchy and
Qui s'opposait
the French colonists.
à la monarchie et au colonialisme français.
For those reasons, the
Pour ces raisons,
Vietnamese instructed Aja Mien
les Vietnamiens ont donné
to leave
instruction à
his
Aja Mien
manhood and to
de-
return to Tai Ninh.
retourner à Tai Ninh,
Actually, we call that Rong Dam Ray.
que nous appelons en Khmer Rom Dam Nang.
And then his name was changed to Sơn Ngọc Minh.
C'est là qu'il s'est fait appeler Song Ngọc Minh.
And that person, who was named Sơn Ngọc Minh, organized
Et ce
a
Sơn Ngọc Minh
Mutkiha organization.
A monté
And there
une
were 3 or 4 main
organisation
figures.
qui
They
comptait
were
3 ou
Sơn
4
Ngọc Minh,
personnalités importantes.
Aja
Il y avait
Mien, formerly,
Song Ngọc Minh ou Aja
Siêu
Mien,
Heang,
Si Heang,
Uncle Tu Samut,
Tu Samut
and Mr. Lam Pai.
et Lam Pai.
This latter was also a Khmer Krom. Actually, all
Ce
of them
dernier était
were
aussi
Khmer
un
Krom
Khmer
from
C'était tous
Tai
en
Ninh.
fait des Khmer Krom de Tai Ninh.
Vietnam rather Lam Pai. Lam Pai was the in-law
Lam
of
Pai
Sơn Ngọc Thành. And
était un
as
parent par
Vietnam
alliance de Son Ngoc
observed
Thanh.
that relationship,
Et les Vietnamiens,
they
constatant
instructed Lam Pai
ce lien de parenté, ont donné instruction à Lam
liaise
Pai d'assurer la liaison
and to convince Sơn Ngọc Thành
avec Son Ngoc Thanh
to join the
et de
National
convaincre
Committee
celui-ci de se joindre au
Muk
comité
Ha,
national Mukiha,
which means the National Liberation
qui
Committee.
veut dire Comité national de libération.
At that time, Sơn Ngọc Thành rode an
Son Ngoc
elephant
Thanh
to the mountain.
est
However,
allé dans les montagnes à l'époque.
He was ambushed by
À
the
ce moment-là,
enemy,
mais il est
and
tombé
as
dans
he
une
could not
embûche
go, he
ennemie.
returned.
Et comme il n'a pas pu aller jusqu'au bout, il a rebroussé chemin.
After that, a party of the Indochina was formed.
C'est après cela qu'a été créé le Parti communiste indo-chinois.
That was in the year of 1951.
En 1951.
And actually, 3 parties were formed
3 partis en fait ont
in
été
that
créés
year.
cette année-là.
Even though the name entitled Indo-Chinese Communist Party, they could not mobilize the popular forces to join
Le
that
PCI
party,
en effet était
and for that
incapable de
reason the
mobiliser les
party
gens
was
autour de son
divided
nom.
into
Et le
3 separate
PCI a donc été
parties.
divisé en 3 partis
However, all
distincts.
the 3
Mais
parties
les
were
3
still under the
partis
control
restaient
of the
toujours sous le
Vietnamese.
contrôle des
They
Vietnamiens.
have their people at every
Les
level,
Vietnamiens avaient des gens à tous
from
les
the
niveaux,
central level up
du
to
niveau
the
central
village
jusqu'au
level.
niveau des villages.
They have what they call Ban Can Sư, that is the
Ils avaient ce
Vietnamese
qu'ils appelaient des Ban Can Se,
party
c'est-à-dire
leading and
des leaders
directing
vietnamiens
the National
qui
Liberation
menaient
Committee.
les comités.
That National Liberation
révolutionnaires.
Committee
Le comité
was
national
under
révolutionnaire
the control
était
and
sous
order
le
of
contrôle
the Vietnamese Communist Party,
donc du Parti communiste vietnamien,
where Nguyen Thanh Sơn
avec
was
notamment
in
Nguyen Thanh
charge
Sen qui était aux commandes
in the South Vietnam.
au Sud-Vietnam.
The Vietnamese actually controlled the
Les Vietnamiens
Cambodian National
contrôlaient
Liberation
Le
Committee,
comité national cambodgien de
and below
libération.
that, even at the zone level,
Et
there was
même au
still
niveau
the
des
Vietnamese
zones, il
committee
y avait des
controlling.
comités qui étaient contrôlés toujours par des
And for
Vietnamiens.
the army at that time,
Pour ce qui est de
it was
l'armée à
the
l'époque,
same.
c'était la même
Although the
chose.
name is referring to the Cambodian people,
Même si
like
dans
Acha Chum,
Des noms
Acha Chiu,
Acha Chum, Acha
Acha
Chim,
Pu Kambao,
Acha
or
Pu
Acha
Kambao
Swa,
ou Acha
the
Swan
actual commanders
sont des Cambodgiens. Les
were those
vrais
of the
commandants
Vietnamese.
étaient des Vietnamiens.
The Cambodian commanders were just
Les
the
commandants cambodgiens
figurehead.
n'étaient que des faire-valoir.
This is a summary of
Voilà
the
donc,
event.
En résumé,
So, in summary,
comment se présentait
Vietnam
la situation.
controlled
Et pour récapituler, le
everyone
Vietnam
until after the
contrôlait
Geneva
tout
Convention in 1961.
après les accords de Genève et jusqu'en 1961.
Vietnam, even up to that year, was still
Le Vietnam
infiltrating inside the
continué
Cambodian territory.
d'infiltrer le
For
territoire
example,
cambodgien jusqu'à cette année.
Le Dun
Par exemple, les douanes
was actually in Phnom Penh,
étaient à Phnom Penh,
at the south of the Yukonto School.
au sud
I know this
du lycée
person very well.
Yukontong. Je le connaissais très bien.
So the so-called Indo-Chinese Communist Party, which was later on divided into three separate parties, including one of the Cambodian Popular Communist Party, and in Laos it was named similarly,
un parti qui porte un
and
nom
the
similaire,
Vietnamese was called the Vietnamese Labour Party
le
or
Parti des
Loi
travailleurs
Dong.
vietnamiens ou Lao Dong.
The changes were only in the name, but the leadership and control was still that of the Vietnamese.
De nom, et les commandants restaient
That was for
des
that
Vietnamiens.
phase of the
Voilà pour ce qui concerne
movement.
cette phase du
And
mouvement.
by 1960,
À compter de 1960,
Vietnam started their armed
le Vietnam a
struggle
commencé sa lutte armée
to liberate South
pour
Vietnam,
libérer le Sud-Vietnam.
but they did not have a territory to occupy.
Mais
Then they came to request for seeking their refuge
il n'y avait pas
in
de territoire et ont donc
Cambodia.
demandé à pouvoir chercher refuge
So
sur le
they
territoire
came
du
to take
Cambodge.
refuge in
Ils ont donc cherché
Cambodia,
refuge
including
au
Nguyen Van Linh,
Chea,
ISO,
y
etc.
compris Nguyen Man Linh,
Even Lê Duân
ISO,
himself
Lê
also
Duân
came
lui-même
to take refuge
s'est
in
réfugié
Cambodia.
au Cambodge.
And I witnessed that personally.
J'en étais moi-même le témoin.
This attests to the fact that the Vietnamese party
Cela montre que le parti
relied
vietnamien
on the neutral political
s'est
line
appuyé sur
of
la ligne de neutralité
Cambodia
politique du Cambodge
in order to use it as
pour
a support base to
s'en
struggle
servir de
to
base d'appui
liberate
dans sa
their
lutte
South
de libération
Vietnam.
du Sud-Vietnam.
Let me pause at this point.
Je m'arrête là.
Mr. Noun Chea, to give you another chance,
Question.
I am not asking you about the
Monsieur Lucas,
period
je ne vous parlais pas
of the
de la période
1930s,
des
1940s, or
années
1950s.
30, 40,
I'm asking you
50.
about the
Je
period
vous posais
after
une question qui
September
portait sur la période qui a
1960,
suivi
when you had formed your own
1960,
party
lorsque
and
vous
established
aviez
your own
constitué
political
votre propre
lines.
parti, qui était
After
doté de
that
sa propre ligne
time,
politique.
during the 1960s and
Après cela, dans les années
1970s,
60 et 70,
as the deputy secretary of
vous
the
étiez
party,
secrétaire adjoint du
were
parti
you a
et en tant
puppet
que
of
tel,
Vietnam,
est-ce que vous étiez
or did you make
un
your own
pantin du
decisions?
Vietnam ou est-ce que vous preniez vos propres décisions?
Carnal,
Response.
Réponse.
At that time, I was not a puppet
À
of the
l'époque, je n'étais
Vietnamese.
pas un pantin entre les mains des Vietnamiens.
However, for certain affairs, we
Mais
had to have
pour certaines
discussions
questions, il fallait
with
bien que
them,
nous ayons des discussions avec les Vietnamiens.
starting from 1960.
À partir de 1960,
The Communist Party of Cambodia
Le
had
PCK
its own tactical and
a eu
strategic
sa propre ligne
lines,
stratégique et tactique
which were separate
qui
from
était
the Vietnamese
distincte
ones.
de la ligne vietnamienne.
At that time, we held the view that
Nous pensions à
if
l'époque
we
que
wanted our own independence,
si nous voulions obtenir notre
we needed
indépendance,
to have our own
nous devions
strategic
avoir notre
and
propre
tactical
stratégie et
lines
notre propre tactique,
independent from other parties,
indépendante
as
de la
I
ligne d'autres partis.
stated since the 5th or the 6th of
C'est ça, comme je
December.
le dis, depuis le 5 ou le 6 décembre.
We would not be subordinate
Nous ne
to
voulions pas
Vietnam.
être subordonnés au Vietnam.
So is it correct
Question.
then, Mr. Noun Chea, that
Est-il
during
alors
this
exact de
period,
dire que
during the
pendant cette
period
période,
from September
allant de
1960
septembre,
forward, after you had
1960,
established your own
jusqu'au
political
moment où vous avez,
lines, that
institué
the
votre propre ligne
standing
politique,
and central
les
committees
comités
of the
centraux et le
Communist
comité
Party
permanent
of Kampuchea
du Parti communiste
were
du
not puppets
Kampuchea
of Vietnam,
n'étaient pas
but made their own
des
decisions.
pantins
Is that
entre les
correct?
mains des Vietnamiens, mais prenaient leurs propres décisions. Et c'est exact.
ទាំងអស់នេះ
Response.
Réponse.
We made our own
Nous
decisions.
prenions nos propres décisions.
Vietnam did not have the right to do
Le
so.
Vietnam n'avait pas le droit de le
However,
faire.
if we say they were satisfied with our
Mais
decisions,
est-ce qu'ils étaient
no.
satisfaits de nos décisions? Non.
They blamed us. They blamed
Ils
that
nous l'ont reproché.
the Communist
Ils
Party
nous ont
of
reproché le fait
Cambodia
que le
was
Parti communiste
leftist.
du Cambodia, ils ont taxé le PCK de gauchisme.
តស៊ូ
That we struggled with a line inappropriate
Ils
to
ont dit que
the
notre ligne
Marx-Leninist.
n'était pas
That is
conforme
what I
au
can
marxisme-léninisme.
recall.
Voilà ce
And
dont
they
je me
also
souviens.
blamed the
Ils
Communist
ont aussi
Party of Cambodia
reproché au PCK
that we did not seek consultation
de
with
ne
the
pas
Vietnamese
consulter
party.
le parti vietnamien.
And then the CPK replied that
Ce à quoi le PCK a répondu,
we are independent,
disant que
neutral,
nous étions
and we
indépendants,
have our own
neutres,
sovereignty,
que nous avions notre propre souveraineté,
and we should conduct our business
et que
based
nous
on the real
nous
situation in
organiserions
our
en
country.
fonction de la situation réelle
However,
propre à
if
notre
Comrade
pays. Et
Vietnam,
que si les camarades vietnamiens,
at that time we still use the word
à
Comrade,
l'époque on disait encore camarades,
and if Comrade Vietnam
donc,
would like
les
to
camarades
give us
vietnamiens
some advice,
voulaient nous donner des
of course we
conseils,
would accept it,
bien sûr,
otherwise we
nous
would
les
do
accepterions,
it by our own
mais
initiative.
sinon nous procéderions de notre propre initiative.
When you said that the Vietnamese
Question.
party
Vous
complained
dites que
that you were
le parti
leftist,
vietnamien
what did you
vous a
mean by
taxé de
that?
gauchisme. Qu'entendez-vous par là?
ឆ្វេងនិយមនេះ
Response.
Réponse.
Leftist in this sense means
Gauchisme
that
ici
we
veut
struggled,
dire
we conducted armed struggle,
que nous menions la
and
lutte,
that they said the opportunity was not yet ripe for
alors que
armed
d'après les
struggle.
Vietnamiens,
They told
le
us
moment
that
n'était pas encore venu de
comrades
mener la
do
lutte
not
armée.
need to conduct
Ils
armed
nous ont
struggle
dit,
yet.
vous ne devez pas
Wait
entamer la
till
lutte armée maintenant. Attendez
Vietnam liberates
que le
the South
Vietnam
Vietnam first.
libère le Sud-Vietnam d'abord.
Then they would use,
Ensuite,
then they would deploy their soldiers
le
to
Vietnam aurait
attack Phnom
déployé ses
Penh,
soldats pour attaquer
and
Phnom
it would only
Penh.
take them 24
Et
hours
cela
to
ne
do
leur
so.
a pris que 24 heures.
So you comrades, you only need
Donc,
to
disait-on,
prepare
camarades,
some
vous n'avez qu'à
guys to
préparer
lead us there.
quelques
But
guides
Pol Pot
pour nous montrer le
replied
chemin. Mais Pol
that
Pot a répondu
whoever wants to take an
en
action,
disant
that
que
person of course would wants to benefit from it, and for that reason the CPK shall conduct its
PCK
own
devait
affair, own business, educate
mener
itself,
sa
and not
propre
to rely
action et ne
on
pas
another
se
party.
fonder sur un autre parti
In
pour cela.
particular, not to rely
En
on the
particulier,
Vietnamese
ne pas s'appuyer
party,
sur le parti
because
vietnamien,
the Vietnamese party
car le parti
had
vietnamien
numerous tricks under their sleeve
avait
in
plusieurs
order to
tours dans sa manche
encompass and control the Communist
pour
Party of
prendre le
Cambodia,
contrôle
and
du
that they
Parti
would be able
communiste
to
du
lead us
Kampuchea,
if that is the
ce
case.
qui leur permettrait alors de nous diriger.
For that reason, there were conflicts, and
Pour
later on it
cette
led
raison,
to
il y a eu
armed
des
conflict.
conflits, en définitive un conflit armé.
អត់ទោសខ្ញុំសូមទៅប្រគួន
Mr. President, I'd like
Monsieur le
to
Président,
seek your leave to use the
Je
bathroom.
voudrais utiliser les toilettes si vous le voulez bien.
The President, yes,
Président,
you
oui,
can do
je
so.
vous en
Security
prie.
guards,
Personnel de
could you
sécurité,
take him to
veuillez,
the bathroom?
accompagner l'accusé.
The President, the International Deputy Prosecutor, you may now proceed
Monsieur le
with your
coprocureur, vous pouvez
question.
poursuivre. Noun Chea.
The President, it's okay now as you already returned. Deputy Prosecutor, you may now continue with your question.
Monsieur le coprocureur, vous pouvez poursuivre.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
At this time, I'd like to show Mr. Noun Chea a
Je
document
voudrais
that's in
maintenant
the
montrer
case
un
file,
document qui se trouve dans le dossier.
which is
Document
D366
D366
slash
barre
7.1.410. If it's possible to have this document shown to Mr. Noun Chea.
mis à disposition de Noun Chea.
Mr. Noun Chea, you've been handed a document
Monsieur Noun Chea, on vient de vous remettre un document
that are handwritten notes
qui sont des
entitled
notes manuscrites
The Past
intitulées
Struggle
l'histoire
of
la
our
lutte passée
Cambodian
plutôt
Peasants from
des paysans du
1954
Cambodgia
to
de
1970,
1954 à 1970
that at the bottom of the first
et en
page
bas de la première page
are attributed to you, and that
trouve
appear to
quelque
contain a
chose qui vous
history
attribue
of
ce
events
document et cela
provided
semble
by you.
être
Do you
un
recognize
récit
this
des événements de
document?
l'époque tel que vous l'avez écrit. Est-ce que vous
Excuse
reconnaissez
me
ce
for
document?
interrupting.
Maître Pesman
Is it possible to get a copy of
Peut-on
the
avoir une copie de ce
document so that we can
document
have a look at it as well?
pour que nous puissions aussi savoir de quoi il retourne?
Counsel, it's on the case file. You have computer access, which is
C'est dans
how
le dossier,
we're
répond
intending
le
for all of us to
procureur,
access
vous
documents.
avez accès au dossier.
Because it's not
et
shown
c'est
on
bien
the screen,
l'intention du dossier.
and we have no reference to
Maître
any
Pesman,
English
nous n'avons pas de
translation. either.
référence à une traduction anglaise et ce document ne se trouve pas affiché à l'écran.
The President,
Le président,
court officer,
je demande à
could you
l'huissier
show the document
de faire
on the
apparaître ce
screen?
document à l'écran.
That is the document cited by the
Document
prosecution,
cité par
so that the
l'accusation
parties and the chamber
pour que les
are
parties
able to view it.
et la
Thank you.
chambre le voient.
Mr. President, if you may, we did intend when we got to specific questions regarding this document to show the Khmer version on the
Nous
screen
souhaitons
to
montrer
help
la
with the
version
witness.
Khmer à l'écran pour aider
I
le
certainly
témoin.
have the ERNs for the
J'ai
other
les numéros
languages, but
RN pour,
in terms of
les
other
différentes
counsel
langues.
following along, these
Mais pour ce
documents
qui est des
are available
avocats,
on
ces
the
documents
computers that
sont
we all have
disponibles
here.
dans le système et
So I can
ils
provide
peuvent être obtenus grâce aux
Mr. Noun
ordinateurs qui
Chea's
sont mis à
counsel with the
disposition
ERN
des
in
équipes dans
English,
le prétoire.
but
Je
in
peux
terms of
donner
what
les
we
numéros
intended
RN
to
en
show on
anglais
the
et en
screen,
français,
it would be
mais
the
à
Khmer
l'écran, c'est en
version
tout
of
cas
the
la version
document.
Khmer que nous souhaitons afficher.
And counsel, the English version is
Anglaise,
ERN
porte le numéro RN
00716-409 through to 716-430.
00 71 64 09 à 30.
Mr. President, if we have the document up on our screen, if you would like to
Le
switch to
document
our,
est maintenant à
our
l'écran
screen.
de nos ordinateurs, on peut l'afficher sur l'écran de tout le monde.
So my first question Mr. Noun Chea, is whether you recognize this document. Is this your handwriting, or is this the handwriting of someone who took a statement from you in 1998?
Response. Mr. President, allow me to speak. I have never seen this document, and the handwriting is not mine.
L'écriture n'est pas la mienne.
My handwriting is different from this. I can show you if you allow me to write. This is the first time that I see this document.
Can you look at the bottom of the first page, and do you see there where the words appear by Noun Chea? Is that also not your handwriting on the very first page at the bottom?
Tout en bas de la première page.
Response.
Réponse.
This is not my handwriting.
Non, ce n'est pas mon écriture.
Because I have never seen this document
Je n'ai jamais vu ce
before.
document.
And my handwriting is not this neat.
Et mon écriture n'est pas aussi propre.
Did you meet with a Kem Nun in 1998, around May 1998, at which you provided him with a statement regarding the history of the movement from 1954 to 1970?
Response. Can you clarify your question? Whom did I meet? I did not quite catch your question. Please clearly state the name.
I apologize if my pronunciation is not correct. Do you know a Mr. Kem Nun? And did you meet with him in 1998 and provide him with a statement regarding the history of the movement from 1954 to 1970?
Response. Mr. President, I never met this person Kham Nun. Nor I ever handed this document to any person.
Mr. President, my National Council colleague has told me that the name was not pronounced or translated correctly in Khmer. So let me try again. And perhaps it would help if I spell it phonetically. The way it is spelt phonetically in English is first Khem and then Ngun, pronounced Kem Nun. Do you know this person, and did you meet with him in 1998?
Your Honor, I reiterate that I never known or met this person. Could you clarify his occupation and where do you think I met him? Can you clarify this point? Says the accused.
Well, Mr. Noun Chea, I'm not the one who met with him, so I will give you, we also have a typed version of this document that identifies the person. So I will provide the Khmer version of the typed document, which is IS 20.28, in which you can see the individual's name, and then I will ask you again whether you met with him in 1998. Mr. President, if I may forward to the witness in this is a document that is in the case file as IS 20.28. The Khmer ERN pages that I'm going to ask be shown to the accused are 000-78183 through 78206. And for the record, too, this is one of the documents cited in the portions of the closing order that were read, and that, therefore, pursuant to the court's previous order, were considered put before the chamber subject to objections.
The court officer is now instructed to forward the document to the accused. Can this document be also shown on the screen so that the parties and the chamber can examine? Could you activate your mic before you speak? The accused. For this document, as I remember, it was an unofficial document. It was not an official document. And as for Kham Ngun, as far as I know, he was sent by Mr. Hun Sen as a spy, and his code number is 09. But I acknowledge this is the case. I said during that time the history of the party. But I don't think I talked about this issue directly. There was a recorded tape. I never addressed someone by the word "a" or "me," derogatory word. But as I can see in these documents, it appears that I use these words. But I acknowledge that I did talk with Kham Ngun.
You indicated that this was a discussion that was tape recorded. Is that correct?
Mr. President, there was no discussion. There was no tape recording. I was only talking something unofficially. I was there alone, so I could not recall all the events because it had been for a long time. It was like a chit chat.
Was there anyone present other than yourself and Kem Noon?
As far as I know, no. There was no other. It's not Kem Nguyen, it's Kem Nguyen.
I apologize for my pronunciation. Were you truthful when you had this chit-chat with him?
At that time, I was truthful, as I remember. I was not hiding anything. I talked about the qualifications of the Communist Party of Cambodia. I also talked about the weaknesses of the party. Kem Nguyen worked with Tamok.
Thank you, Mr. Noun Chea. We'll be getting back to this document during the course of my examination. I wanted now to just turn to some general questions about interviews that you've provided in the past to reporters or journalists about the background and history of the party. Between 1998 and 2007, have you occasionally spoken to reporters or journalists who came to visit and interview you?
I could not recall it. I could not recall who is who. But I did talk to some people. I do not recall whether they were journalists. And I talked to them based on my memory. And I was truthful.
I'm going to read you some names and ask you if you remember speaking to these people. Nusara Tetawat, a reporter from Thailand who interviewed you around September 2001. Do you remember speaking to that person?
No, I don't remember that.
Do you remember a Mengtri Ie who came to visit you in June 2006?
No, I don't. I don't remember the name, I don't remember anything.
Do you remember a Japanese journalist who came to meet with and interview you in October of 2006?
No, I don't remember that either.
How about Mr. Tet Sambat? Do you remember the interviews you gave to him?
Yes, I know him, I remember that. Because Tet Sambat tried to contact me for the last 10 years. He contacted me for 10 years until I trusted him. And I know him now. But when he met me, he told me that what he would get from me will be used as archives for your family. I was not paying attention that the document he would obtain from me would be made into a film or a documentary film. I don't know whether he was lying to me, but he told me that it was, or it will be used as an archive for my family. And so I told him truthfully. I know him, Mr. Tizambat.
You were aware that you were being filmed, a videotape recorded when you were speaking to Mr. Tet Sambat. Is that correct?
No, I don't think I was being videotape recorded. Maybe he was hiding the camcorder. I don't know.
I just want to make sure that's clear. You're saying you did not see any camera filming your interviews when you were meeting with Tet Sambat?
I was not paying any attention.
And you said you were truthful in the conversations you had with Tet Sambat? Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Is it true that after you were arrested and detained here at the court, that you listed Tet Sambat as a relative so that he could come and visit you at the detention center and continue to interview? Is that true?
My wife, rather, Tet Sambat's wife may be a relative of mine, but Tet Sambat himself is not. We are still in contact with her. My wife frequently visits Tet Sambat's wife, but I had never before known him and his wife. But when we talked together, we realized that we were related. I had some of my relatives in Jrok Krasang village.
I understand that you and Tet Sambat are not actually related, but my question was whether you had him listed as a relative with the court so that he could come and visit you and speak to you in the detention center.
I don't remember that.
Do you consider him a friend?
No, I don't. We just know each other, just like normal people.
Did you have any understanding or agreement with Tet Sambat as to when he could publicly release the information that you provided to him?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't understand the relevance of this question for the scope of the first trial segment, which is only about the historical background, the pre-1975 period.
Mr. President, the relevance is that in the book that Mr. Tet Sambat published of his interviews, based on his interviews with Mr. Noun Chea, there are parts that discuss the history and the pre-1975 period. that is the relevance of the interviews that the accused had with Tet Sambat to this part of the proceedings.
I don't know which book the prosecutor is referring to, but as far as I'm aware, that book is not on the case file.
Counsel, when that book was recently discovered, it was filed with the chamber either last week or the week before, and I've seen it myself. It was posted onto the case file at some point. I'm happy to find the case file reference number for you later, but I'd suggest you get that information from me during the break, and that I be allowed to proceed with my questions at this time.
Counsel Sonaron, as far as I know, the court requests Mr. Sesambat to send the documentary film that he has shown in foreign countries, but Mr. Sesambat does not allow the court to use that documentary film. He does not also allow the court to use his book as a basis to accuse my client. So I hereby reject the questions by the co-prosecutors.
Monsieur le Président, je crois que pour...
Mr. President, to fully understand what is being stated by the prosecutor, it would be useful to hear what file he is talking about. When he says that a document has been filed, what file are we talking about? Are we talking about documents that have been appended to the closing order? Are we talking about documents that are in the investigative documents? It will be useful for the clarity of these discussions to have a little more precision here.
Mr. President, can the co-prosecutor clarify or indicate the identity of the book which you have referred to? The books that you referred to as the book written by Mr. Titsambat, and you are basing on it as the evidence to talk about the history or historical background of the democratic Cambodia.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm happy to do that. Just so we're clear, I'm not intending at this point right now to start asking questions from this book. I was asked for the relevancy, and these are foundational questions to establish the conversations. But I'm somewhat surprised this document was posted on the case file just this week and recently. And if counsel are not following the information that's being posted and provided them on the case file, that is certainly not our problem. The ERN for this document is 0075747 to 568. There is a E document filing number that I'll provide to the court after the break. I don't have it here right now. It is a book called Behind the Killing Fields by Tet Sambat and Gina Chan. And I'm told that the case file number is E152.2.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I thank the prosecutor for reminding us of our duty to keep a close eye on the case files, but it seems to me that when he is talking about the document having been filed, he is saying that this document has been communicated to the parties. When you talk about putting things on the file, it's not quite the same as communicating the document to all of the parties to the trial. and submitting evidence that can be accepted as such by the Chamber isn't quite the same thing either, and I don't think therefore that we should be at the receiving end of too many lessons on this, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. Kanavas, please go ahead.
If I may, just very briefly, I believe it was on a Friday afternoon that we received an email from Mr. Cayley with an attachment about this particular book. And I believe it was after opening statements. In the very first page, it indicates that the book was the product of or from 1,000 hours of interviews, 1,000 hours of interviews with Mr. Noun Chea. When reading the book, those of us who may have read the book, it's quite apparent that this is more of an autobiographical or somewhat autobiographical, with Tet Sambat talking about himself, also drawing certain conclusions from the interviews, not necessarily quoting all the time. My objection would be, unless Mr. Tet Sambat is definitely going to be appearing, I would be objecting to this book coming in unless the prosecution were able to get a hold of the 1,000 hours of tapes, and of course, wherever he wishes to quote from the book, a verification can be made that what Mr. Noun Chea actually did say is in fact what is being reported. A summary of what Mr. Noun Chea may have said, or some sort of a conclusion drawn, is not the same, and for those reasons I would object. But I do recognize that the prosecution, in doing their due diligence, did provide it to us, albeit late. It has been around for about a year or so, but I certainly wasn't familiar with the book, so I can understand how this may have fallen through the cracks. Thank you.
Just Mr. Noun Chea, says the President. Mr. Noun Chea. I wrote a book about my biography. And I asked Mr. Tet Sambat to publish the book in Cambodia. He told me that it would be more worthy if we published the book in New York, because people in Cambodia do not like reading. I don't understand very much about this book publication either. And so I allow him to do that. It has been some years before its publication. I wrote about the history of the regime. And Mr. Sambat translated that into English, and he entitled the book as "The Enemy of the People." But he did not consult with me before he did that. My original book was about the history of the party and to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the party. He took the book and published it in New York because he believed that it was more valuable to do so. But I was not aware of that. I do not know how the book has been changed from my original version. I asked for a copy of the book so that I can compare the new book with my original book, but I was not given the new book. So this is the point. I was not even informed that this book has been made into a documentary film. My rights have been violated for this action. The President. Thank you, Mr. Noun Chea, for your information. But the proceedings before the court may be different from what you have described. That the document need to be presented before the chamber, need to be examined before it can be accepted as evidence. And for any evidence to be examined will be done pursuant to the facts determined to be discussed during the first phase of the trials, so that we can avoid any confusion. If we are not this strict in terms of the management of the trial, it will not be possible for us to manage trial. This is a technical issue with regards to the management of the trial. However, there may be instances that parties point to documents or refer to documents which have not been examined. Party may be referring to the documents which they intend to be put before the chamber at a later stage. And you are here being presented with a document, for example, the documents that you talked with Khmer. And now I would like to hand over to Judge Cartwright to provide further clarification on this matter.
Thank you, President. Mr. Prosecutor, my understanding is that you refer to this book, Behind the Killing Fields, by Sambat Tet, in order to establish that there was a relationship by way of interviews between the accused and Sambat Tet, and not as to the contents of the book at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, Judge Cartwright, that's correct. At this time, we're not intending to ask any questions from the book. We just wanted to clarify the history between the two of them, and whether they did in fact have these conversations, and how this book came about.
So, although at a later stage you may wish to put the book before the chamber, you are not doing that at this time. Is that also correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, President.
The President. It is now appropriate for the court to adjourn for lunch. This morning's session is now adjourned and we will resume at 1:30 this afternoon. Parties and the public should be informed of this and return to the court by 1:30. Detention personnel are instructed to bring the accused back to the holding cells downstairs and return them to the courtroom by 1:30.
Some Okun Lok Putin, some Kurup, all Lok, Luxray Chakram, Nang Pirkiting O, Satirna Chontang O. Timui, Kambat, some in Jack, Ta Kyom Khmer, Katrang, and Tang Pu Yin High. Trên bị prey máu mà nơi bay lính miền tại ban xong coi luôn hai nông ban bỏ chân ao tại phần nào đang tì muối đây nhóm xong mình trẻ tí phí đây nhóm xong mình trẻ cứ côn nhóm từng o rồi thằng ấy nó không chỉ vứt phải trăm thằng ấy nữa người thưa ca ban tay về thưa cá ban bạc khai là mómแต่ฉันจำครูนดีฉันจำครูนอย่างไม่ฉันจำครูนได้รู้nơiក្នុងផ្ទះល្វែងមួយតែមួយជាមួយគ្នាចេញថ្លៃទឹកចេញថ្លៃភ្លើងហើយនឹងចំណីម្ហូបអាហារដោយចេញច្រាក់លុយគ្នាព្រមទាំងកូនមួយដែលវាមានកូនមានផ្ញើឲ្យមករៀននៅពេញហ្នឹងក៏វាផ្ញើលុយជួយច្រាក់គ្នាអញ្ចឹងបើប្រសិនជាខ្ញុំបានទៅនៅជុកជុំគ្រួសារកូនចៅខ្ញុំវិញខ្ញុំជឿជាក់ថាកូនខ្ញុំអាចច្រាក់គ្នាឲ្យខ្ញុំហូបបាយហូបអីទឹកដូចជាមួយវាដូចរាល់ថ្ងៃសប្តាហ៍អញ្ចឹងដែរទី2ទី3ខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបបញ្ជាក់ថាប្រពន្ធខ្ញុំពេលគាត់មកលេងខ្ញុំម្ដងនៅកន្លែងមន្ទីរឃុំឃាំងគាត់ជិះម៉ូតូមកទេហើយបើថាចាំបាច់ដើម្បីខ្ញុំមកចូលរួមពេលដែលតុលាការកោះហៅខ្ញុំគាត់ខ្ញុំជឿជាក់ថាគាត់អាចដុបម៉ូតូខ្ញុំមកបាននឹងខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបយ៉ាងនេះហើយក្រៅពីនេះខ្ញុំសូមបន្ថែមថាខ្ញុំគោរពលក្ខខណ្ឌទាំងអស់ដែលតុលាការនឹងដាក់ជូនហើយជាពិសេសគឺធានាថានឹងមកមានវត្តមាននៅក្នុងគ្រប់សវនាការរបស់តុលាការយើងនេះរហូតចុងបញ្ចប់សូមអរគុណបាទ